Good evening, warriors, and welcome to the Unpopular Perspective. In today's video, it's going to be about the loneliness epidemic that is running rampant here in the United States. Many people, not just young men, but people of all ages, are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness, and it's growing rampant. Now, this is an older segment from uh, from CBS Morning News. It was filmed about 6 years ago. I had it saved, on my account, and I just thought I can use it as a backdrop to this particular subject I wanted to talk about for a while. And it's featuring Mr. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General. So he's going to go into some of the effects of the so-called loneliness epidemic, and I'm going to chime in with my unpopular perspective.
Former Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy tackled a range of public health crises. They included issues like Zika, drug and alcohol addiction, and obesity. But he also shed light on a silent crisis, the rising number of lonely people in America. He spoke about his concern at the Aspen Ideas Festival last year.
Many people I have met have thousands of friends on Facebook, but find few people who really know them. As a society, we have built stronger Wi-Fi connections over time, but our personal connections have deteriorated.
Now, in a Harvard Business Review article, Murthy writes, loneliness is a growing health epidemic. He calls on companies to make fostering social connections a strategic priority. Dr. Vivek Murthy joins us back at the table. It's good to see you again.
Thanks, great to be here.
Now, this is a topic that you say that you know personally about. You said that you were a shy, lonely kid, that people didn't even know that about you.
That's true. In fact, it's something I've never even talked to my own family about. But when I was a child, I was very shy. It was hard for me to make friends, and I felt lonely a lot. But I felt ashamed to tell that to people.
Why the shame? Yeah.
Well, for many people and for myself, when I was a child, admitting that you're lonely is essentially equivalent to admitting that you're not worthy of being loved. That's really what underlies this stigma around loneliness.
So why is loneliness?
Well, I wouldn't say that's necessarily the stigma around it, that you feel that you're unworthy of love. I feel that for many people, including brothers who view my channel, who have a spiritual understanding and they think on a higher dimensional level than majority of the peers that they had when they were growing up, I'm pretty sure that many of you brothers felt sort of outcasted and sort of out of place, like you've never fit in because you thought on such a high level, especially when it comes to so-called younger black males who are highly intelligent and have been blessed with spiritual understanding of life. Many of you brothers who may have grown up in a hood or, grown up in a black community at a young age, you saw a lot of the confusion and degeneracy in the culture and the neighborhoods, and was sort of ostracized by your peers because you were quiet. Maybe you had certain different types of interests, in comparison to some of your peers and your associates. Maybe you weren't into hip hop. Like for me, for example, when I was coming up, I wasn't into hip hop music. My uncle and my father, they were big time. My father was a trumpet player, and he raised me up on a lot of jazz music and blues and old school R&B. So I grew up listening to funk and jazz and stuff like that. So my taste of music sort of made me an outcast amongst a lot of my associates and peers at the time because I just couldn't relate. I wasn't listening, even though I did listen to hip hop. It wasn't my first love and form of music. So look, just little things like that growing up, when your brain operates on a higher frequency and a level of thinking, you will be sort of looked at as an outcast, but that's okay. That's okay. Most great thinkers and most men who are unique all throughout history have always been associated with being strange or peculiar. But, you just have to learn how to just grasp that and deal with it because the Most High has a higher calling on your life. Most people who go through life, they're just floating like a feather in the wind. Most of them have no direction. They don't have any understanding of the society and the environment that they live in. To them, they're just living. And that's why so many people are so confused and lost today, because they don't understand the environment and the aspects of this existence that we call life. Once you have an understanding and grasping of that, brothers, everything makes sense and life is easy. Now, I'm not saying life doesn't have its challenges, but when you have a foundation through the Most High, through the scriptures, you have a spiritual understanding, everything becomes easier for you.
It's now an epidemic.
Well, we are recognizing that loneliness is a lot more prevalent than we thought it was. But the data is also showing that there are more adults who admit to being lonely now than just 2 decades ago. And there are several possible reasons for this. Number one, people are more mobile now than they ever have been. People move away from their community.
Okay, so brothers, you see this here? So it says adults report feeling lonely that is doubled since the 1980s. Now, if you go back to my previous videos, I discussed how, when I was coming up, I came up during the era of the 90s and early 2000s. That was my range. And I had talked about how, back then it was more, people were more social because we didn't have the distractions and the means to exert our focus into electronic devices. I think the only distractions we had back then were television and, video games. And that was pretty much it. And even back then, because the onus was on the parents back then to make sure that their kids were educated and they kept their minds thinking and clear and focused, there were restrictions that were placed on you. Any of you brothers that grew up in the household back in the 90s or early 2000s, whatever, if you had a Super Nintendo or Nintendo or Atari, whatever, if your parents were strict, there were time periods where they would tell you, cut it off, go to sleep, or you can only play the game on weekends. And if you do watch TV, you watch it after you finish your homework and you cut that TV off at a certain time, or you're just going to get your ass whooped because you had to make sure you had to be up for school the next morning. So don't let your mother or your father catch you trying to watch the TV till 9 o'clock. That's just how it was back then. Nowadays, you have kids who have cell phones at the age of 8, 9, 10, some even younger than that. I've seen babies with tablets and, their parents give them these devices and so they can keep them distracted and they don't have to be bothered with them. So it's just a different generation that we live in. And these issues are just going to grow more and more apparent as time goes on.
In their home, there are record numbers of people who are actually living alone. But we also know that technology has had a potential role here. Technology can help or hurt. It's simply a tool. But for too many people, technology has led to substituting online connections for offline in-person connections. And ultimately, I think that has been harmful.
Looking at your phone instead of talking to someone.
Exactly. Or spending time on Facebook or on other social media thinking that is equivalent to sitting down and seeing a friend and talking to them face to face.
Is it more common?
Yes, this is one reason why I advise, young men, as I stated, I believe it was in my looks maxing video, I stated to get out there and talk to people, actually go up and talk to a girl. So many men in this modern day era, they lack the social skills because we live in a digital era and we're moving into the AI era, and everything is primarily based around imagery, right? Using your looks. But the thing is, in order to have a compatible relationship with a woman or a relationship with anyone, even with friends or meeting associates or acquaintances, or if you need to make business moves, you need to understand how to communicate and read people. Social cues and understanding social dynamics are extremely important to a man's development. And if you do not have these things, you will be socially handicapped. And that's what I see happening to a lot of young men nowadays. They're becoming socially handicapped because they live in a society that is teaching them to not depend on living in the real world. So brothers, get out there, join a martial arts class down the street, get connected with men, join group organizations, take up a sales job or a job where you service or help people, where you're communicating with people, even if it's a small part-time job. Go to farmers markets in the summertime in your neighborhood just to talk to local farmers who are selling food, stuff like that. You just have to get out there and find a way to communicate. you know Now, I make this channel to teach brothers and to give them my perspective, but I want brothers to get out there and socialize and build communities in the real world, not in a digital world. You need to build your life in the real world, because this society is slowly trying to train men and women, but primarily men, to create digital avatars for themselves. They want you to be more engulfed into the metaverse. And I'm trying to tell you to be more engulfed in the real world. But anyway, let's continue.
Common in men than women?
Well, the data is interesting on that, but we have reason to believe that men may be more at risk in some ways for loneliness. And some of this has to do with our culture around masculinity. We think that masculinity is tied to being self-sufficient and not expressing your emotions, and certainly not admitting to feelings of loneliness. But many men do feel lonely, especially after they get married or have children where their social circles narrow. Women are much better at keeping their connections in life than men are.
Doctor, I think the interesting point you make too, though, is the connection.
Yeah, so he made an interesting point talking about men and how they're more lonely. It's because the social engineering and the social dynamics for men in this society is that you are practically a drone. Your job and your criteria is to grow up, don't think for yourself, become a product for the corporations or for the global corporations, but primarily the American corporation. Get a job, be stupid enough to not have any level of spiritual or deep dimensional thought, or don't have any understanding of the woman, knock up some broad, have kids with her, go to divorce court, get screwed, and pay out money to more corporations, right? So that's the reason why I make this channel, man, because men don't understand that you are a worker drone in this society. That's it. You're a machine with a dick. And that's why I tell brothers it's so important to understand your environment and where you're at right now. It's a spiritual war, and there's layers to this. You get me? You're not supposed to have any feelings in this society because you are a machine. You are disposable. You're a sperm receptacle. That's it. You give out seed, and then you're supposed to be the worker horse in a society that doesn't respect the masculine principle. So yes, most men are depressed, or they may feel lonely and ostracized, because most men are trained to be simps. Once you get married, you're trained to give up your social life. You have to do whatever the woman says, because if you don't, she's going to be a headache and cause issues for you. And you have to be pretty much you're just a second wife. You're a second woman, a second wife to your own wife, raising kids together. When in the ancient world, or even not too many years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago, if you look at the old timers, they went out, they worked, and they had spaces where they would go to the bar or to the club or whatever to socialize with other men. And when they came home, their wife understood, their place. Nowadays, the woman wants you to be her co-partner. You ever notice that these females call you a partner instead of a husband? Is now my partner or my equal. What is that saying? That means that she believes that she's on the same level as you. So men, if you don't find a tribe and connect with other men, and you isolate yourself, you're just hurting yourself in the long run. Men work better in tribes. You have to find men who have the same thinking mentality as you, who have the same belief systems as you, and you have to establish relationships with these men. Men work better working in units, but because we live in this deculturalized society, most men are isolated, and isolation is only going to make you weaker. Wolves run in a pack. They don't run solo. And that's the reason why I created this channel, because I want to build that level of community with like-minded brothers such as myself. Because it's going to be very important in these last days, man. Eventually, we're going to have to move off the internet and be able to cohabitate as men together to build something. But anyway, let me continue.
Between loneliness and our health and real health issues that occur as a result of it.
This is one of the reasons that loneliness is getting more attention, because we are learning more and more about the impact on health. It turns out that loneliness is associated with a reduction in your lifespan that is as severe as the reduction in lifespan that you see with smoking, 15 cigarettes a day. It's greater than the impact on mortality of obesity. And part of this is because that loneliness actually places us in a stress state. We evolved to be social creatures. And thousands of years ago, if you were connected to other people, you were more likely to have a stable food supply and to be protected from predators. So when you're disconnected, you're in a stress state. When that happens chronically, it can have a profound impact on your health.
Do companies and business, I mean, is it worth building in more time for folks to get together? Like CBS News does a walking club right now, and it used to be like.
So that's pretty interesting. He said that many people, when they're isolated for long periods of time, there's been health effects like dementia, or Alzheimer's, heart disease, so forth and so on. And let me say this, there's nothing wrong with being alone. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely, because you can feel lonely by being around many people, right? Being alone means that's a choice. You choose to be alone. And there's a balance to life, brothers. Like, you don't have to ostracize yourself and live like a monk in the mountains. You don't have to do all that. You can structure your life in a way to where there's times where you give energy, and you socialize with people. You go out on a date with a girl, or you spend time with your family. And there's times when you need to isolate and focus on yourself and reground yourself and put things back into the proper perspective, whether that's your goals, your personal life, your spiritual life with the Most High. You have to always take that time period to come back to your foundation and restructure things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But too much of a good thing can be bad. You can be too isolated, as well as you can be too social. If you're too social and you're just going along with the crowd, eventually you begin to lose yourself and you lose your foundation. And some guys have to draw back a little bit. They have to keep a balance. And you can be too isolated to the point to where you're so isolated and you just cut everyone out. Now you're longing for the affection of a woman, or you just need someone to talk to or express your feelings to. Because sometimes men, we do need someone who just to hear us out, even if they don't really care wholeheartedly about what we think. Sometimes just being able to express yourself, whether it's to a close friend or relative, sometimes we need that. At the end of the day, we're social creatures, and the Most High created us to work that way. That's why I always go back to culturalism, tribe, understanding your lineage and your culture of people and your heritage and ethnicity is extremely important, because that is the root foundation for building community. It's the root foundation. If you don't understand your cultural heritage, lineage, and ethnicity, then how can you build a community with people who share those same background and roots as you? That's the reason why I'm so against globalism, because globalism strips you of your cultural heritage and lineage. They want to make you all inclusive into a global pond, when in reality, I believe that understanding your cultural heritage and lineage is extremely important, because that's a signifier for who you are and the foundation of your people, right? So, not to digress too much, but we have to take everything in moderation, brothers, and we have to live accordingly and within balance. There's times we isolate, and there's times we need to be social, but we don't want to go too far to the extreme, either left or right.
Like coffee breaks, right, that people take, or even happy hours, where everyone gets together. Do you think more of those times need to get built in?
Well, I think the quality of time that people have together is what matters. Giving people time to get together during happy hours, that can help to some extent. But sometimes people feel that they're just taking time away from family, or they're taking time away from the work they have to do. And what do they end up doing? Often talking about work, because that's what they have in common.
Yeah.
Instead, providing dedicated time in structured settings for people to truly get to know and understand each other. What are their values? What drives people? What are their experiences and inspirations? And what are their lives outside of work? People hunger to be known authentically, and far too many people feel invisible right now. And that is at the crux of our loneliness
I
epidemic.
think it would be hard for anybody, especially an adult male or female, to admit I'm lonely. And what are you supposed to do with that if you're feeling that way?
Well, it's a great question. So number one is to recognize that if you are feeling lonely, you are not the only one. There are many people out there who are feeling lonely. Number two, if you're feeling lonely, that it does not.
So let me say this. He mentioned something that was that really caught my interest. He stated that most people fundamentally they're so caught up with their work life in corporate America, and they sort of isolate themselves from building authentic relationships and communicating with people, right? And I can attest to this from experience because when I worked in corporate America, most of these people were so miserable. All they did was come to work early and leave late. They had no life outside of work. They couldn't stand being at home. Most of them had dysfunctional families because they were always working 24/7, and most of their conversations were so fucking boring. It'd just be about work and more work. And I'm just sitting here like, damn, like you don't do anything outside of work, dude. You don't travel or you don't do anything like that. And it was just really sad. And it became apparent to me that the corporate America workplace was just nothing more than a drone center. It's just to turn you into a corporate drone where you have no life and only life that you have is lived through your company. And that's one of the reasons why I said I had to get out of there because, you know, the type of person I am, I'm a very creative person and I express myself openly and I don't hold my tongue when it comes to particular subjects or ideas and ideologies that I adhere to. So it was really hard for me to coexist in that space and I had to leave. So don't be one of these lame people or corny people. If someone comes up to you and they want to have an authentic conversation with you at a coffee shop or at a store, don't be one of these motherfuckers where the first thing you start talking about is, well, what is it that you do? Right? I mean, like, don't be one of those guys, man. It's a big thing I notice with drones. The first thing they start talking about is their job. Don't be one of those people, man. Live your life.
Not mean that there's something fundamentally wrong with you and that you're not worthy of friendship or being loved. And finally, if you are not feeling lonely, it's important to recognize there very likely are people around you who are. And that's why it's so important for us to reach out to them. The fundamental thing is this. We have for years thought about ourselves as an individualistic society that champions individual achievement. But what the data around loneliness tells us now more and more is that we are truly interdependent creatures and that ultimately we need.
Yes, he's extremely right. We are interdependent creatures. The Most High made us that way. You know, we were we were created to have family and extended family and to be social beings. That's how the Most High made us. But there are times where you do need to be isolated, but not too much, brothers. You have to have a balance. And also, this is something that I realize, he talked about some people are so narcissistic and nihilistic nowadays, and they're so caught up in their head that they don't see that other people are suffering from the same issue. And it's true because, back in the day when I was coming up, I remember my grandmother lived with us, right? And any of you brothers who grew up, you can attest to this. Back in the day, it wasn't uncommon to have your grandmother or your grandfather, stay with you. It was a normal thing. Where our parents back then had no problem taking care. Especially if they had a good relationship, they had no problem taking care or overseeing the elders until they passed on, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Nowadays, most people throw their parents or grandparents in the old folks home and they never hear from them again. They probably visit them on birthdays or holidays and that's it. And then they have someone else or a caretaker look after their relatives. I mean, to each is their own. Some people do it for financial reasons or personal reasons. But, for me personally, you know, I try to honor my mother and father the best I can. If I have to take care of them in older age, then, that's what I'm gonna do. But our society is just so one-dimensional thinking and narcissistic and nihilistic. Things have definitely changed since the 80s, 90s, early 2000s to now. So anyway, I just say this, brothers, stay focused, put things in a proper perspective, and keep a balance in life. Don't go to the extremes, and everything will work out for you. Anyway, peace and blessings.